Last month, The Atlantic, the monthly magazine, asked on its front cover, can North Korea be stopped? Well, it sounds like the answer came with this weekend's apparent hydrogen bomb test. So now what? Amid reports of preparations for fresh missile tests by Pyongyang, South Korea conducting live fire drills. But beyond shoring up defenses, what else can Seoul do? And while the North fires missiles, Donald Trump's been firing missives on Twitter. And they're not all pointed at Pyongyang. The U.S. president complaining that South Korea is appeasing its neighbor, and despite the crisis, threatening to pull out of a 2012 trade deal with Seoul. Where does that leave President Moon? And what about China and Russia, who also share a border with North Korea? Could it all spin out of control? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Korea's new reality. With us from Washington, he's the former Deputy Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Olli Heinonen, Senior Advisor on Science and Non-Proliferation at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Thank you for joining us.
Urging the Security Council to act before it's too late. The US Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, outlined that time and time again Kim Jong-un had defied sanctions and that it was time to act decisively.
We have engaged in numerous direct and multilateral talks with the North Korean regime, and time after time, they have not worked. The time for half measures in the Security Council is over. The time has come to exhaust all of our diplomatic means before it's too late.
Earlier in the day, South Korea's defense minister predicted more missile strikes in the near future.
We predict that North Korea could fire an intercontinental ballistic missile to show that they have obtained the means of delivering a nuclear bomb to the United States.
In the aftermath of the test, the US said any threat on them or their allies would be met with an overwhelming military response. China lodged an official complaint with Pyongyang, but also condemned inflammatory US rhetoric.
China has stressed many times that military force is not an option to solve the Korean Peninsula issue. Many countries also stressed in their statements or speeches that a peaceful resolution on the peninsula issue is the only correct way out. We agree with that.
Russia, however, said that they would reassess their military position in the region after the US and South Korea deployed more THAAD anti-missile launchers.
In regard to what is happening right on our borders, I mean the ramping up of anti-missile defenses. And this not only concerns North Korea, but as far as I understand it, also Japan. We have not been exerting our military potential in this area. But if this continues to happen at such an alarming tempo, then it is inescapable that at some point we will have to consider our own military response.
In light of these most recent threats, military officials in the south said they had carried out live fire tests which simulated an attack on a North Korean nuclear test site.
All right, with us to talk about it from Washington, the former Deputy Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Olli Heinonen of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We want to welcome here in the studio Dorian Malovic, Asia editor for La Croix, the author in French of North Korea in 100 Questions.
Good evening.
Tristan Webb, senior analyst at the Korea Risk Group. Thank you for being with us from London.
Thank you for the invitation.
And we also want to thank, from New York City, Suki Kim, investigative journalist whose bestseller, Without You There Is No Us, Undercover Among the Sons of North Korea's Elite. We'll be asking you more about that in a short while. Thank you for being with us. The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Last week, there was again that ballistic missile sailing over Japan. Now this. Dorian Malovic, let me start with you. The news coming through of this apparent hydrogen bomb test. What was your first reaction?
Well, I wouldn't say that it was expected, but it was. I mean, after the fifth test last year in September, I mean, the engineers and technicians, they had to improve the system, and then we were expecting a new one. It was now the first, the sixth missile test, and the first under the Donald Trump mandate. So that's a different situation. And the strength of this bomb is like another step, and is kind of escalation, but it's not escalation, it's just another step forward for North Korea to prove that definitely they are a nuclear power. I mean, they are a nuclear power now.
Ali Heinen, were you surprised by this?
Not actually at all. As you know, I have been following this file since 1993. And I have talked with the North Koreans. I know what they have in their mind. And we have seen this stepwise escalation over the years, how they have developed their skills with regard to the missile delivery systems and now the nuclear weapons. But this is a serious situation. This is perhaps the last time when we can stop this program. This detonation yesterday was very large, perhaps somewhere between 50 or 100 kilotons, which means that they have at least a prototype for a very advanced nuclear device.
You're saying it's not too late to stop it?
I think it can be still stopped if we get to the negotiating table. But this will be one of the biggest challenges for the international diplomacy in the last few decades. And it has a lot of consequences in the region, but also elsewhere when we look at nuclear proliferation or non-proliferation. So the challenges are tremendous, but there must be a way to solve it.
But doesn't it sound after this explosion that they already have their nuclear program?
Yes, the nuclear program is there. This was sixth explosion, so we know what they have. But to make it really a nuclear arsenal, to be able to deliver it to the destination reliably, we may still have a chance.
Do you share that hope that, Tristan Webb, that there can be a de-escalation?
There's always room for de-escalation. But when it comes to the denuclearization of North Korea, I think that we have gone well past that stage now. North Korea itself has said that it will denuclearize, but only when the US has denuclearized as well, which seems very far away. For now, I think the best that we can hope for is that the DPRK does not move for the mass production of its new nuclear weapon carrying ICBMs. It says that it's demonstrated the concept, that it has the technology and the materials, but it has not yet said that it has entered mass production and battlefield deployment. So that is the next step, which it would be theoretically possible to perhaps prevent or delay.
Are these weapons of deterrence, or Tristan, are these weapons that Pyongyang would one day like to use? I saw, for instance, a report in the Wall Street Journal about how they could use such a bomb, maybe not to blow up cities, but certainly to hit the U.S. with an electromagnetic pulse attack, blowing it up in the atmosphere to ruin the electric grid.
Right. Well, according to statements from Pyongyang, this is an entirely defensive mechanism. They say that the US has held them to nuclear blackmail for decades, and that finally they are able to avoid an attack by the US and avoid the fate that Saddam Hussein suffered in Iraq and Gaddafi suffered in Libya. They're saying that now they've got the nuclear weapon, their country is safe from attack by the US. But what we need to be worried about is whether or not they do something else with the nuclear technology that they've got. For example, now that they feel more confident that the US wouldn't attack them out of fear of the second strike, does that mean that North Korea is going to be more emboldened for lower level military activity around the northern limit line with South Korea, for example? We might, perhaps, analysts say, see some more aggressive behavior from North Korea. We also need to be very careful of horizontal proliferation that North Korea might, I don't think they would, but they've done it in the past and they might do it again, sell or transfer some of this technology to state actors or even non-state actors. That remains a hypothetical possibility.
Suki Kim, what do you think right now is the frame of mind in Pyongyang?
Well, I mean, what we're seeing isn't actually anything new. You know, there was a nuclear test last year, and also the South Korean military drill also happens annually. So this is just a negotiation, I think. And also, we do have in South Korea more pro-engagement president toward North. So this just is the rite of passage. You do watch North Korea for a while. You know, this is sort of back and forth. And of course, from the United States point of view, Trump's responding hasn't really made it any less. It's sort of activated the
Suki, I'm going to have to interrupt you, unfortunately, because we're going to interrupt you because the sound quality is poor with New York. We apologize for that. We're going to try to fix it and get back right to you in a moment. Again, if you're just joining us, the bomb triggering a 6.3 magnitude quake coming from a site near the Russian border. You can see there where this took place, Dorian Malevich.
It's always the same site for the nuclear test on the north.
Always the same site.
The last one last year, the two last ones were there for the nuclear test.
Now we've heard the reactions in that report from the Chinese and the Russian diplomats ruling out further sanctions, but privately, the Chinese and the Russians, when you look at this map, they must be worried.
Well, the Chinese, I mean, I've been to Yanbian, Yanji on the other side, right? Just north of Pyongyang. They felt the tremors of the bomb. But the Russians, okay, it's very small borderline. But at the same time, they condemned the nuclear device. And at the same time, they want to go back to the table. But I think, I agree with what our guests said from the States. I mean, now what's going to be difficult is how do you accept North Korea definitely as a nuclear power? Starting from that point, it's a totally different approach. That means if you accept it, how do you manage this country? And the negotiations cannot be like you freeze, you destroy, you dismantle. They won't dismantle their nuclear devices now. They have worked on that for 40 years. So
And you heard Tristan Webb there talking about how the North Korean leaders see this as an insurance policy against getting ousted.
Yes, so now the idea is, if they felt more secure, if they feel now more secure, which they can feel more secure, but I think they have to improve a little bit more their technology. For us, it's a new step because it's really, really a huge bomb. But they have to improve it, but they can feel safer. The idea is, what are they going to do feeling safe and safer? It could be like they can do some really nasty things, feeling that the United States are not going to bomb them or like a preemptive strike. So they can be a little bit more dangerous having the bomb with this power and this safety feeling, or can we start negotiating something else than denuclearization of the peninsula? I think that's the point now. We just have to accept that we have to learn to live with the North Korean nuclear power. I mean, that's the point. Now, whether we start from that point and it has a chance we can go ahead a little bit, or if we stick to the same old approach, which is what's happening in the UN today, still the people are condemning the bomb. They are asking for more sanctions, but we have seen that now for 10 years. Is it the proper way? So the risk is to go on the same track. There is also a risk going on the other track, like considering it's a nuclear power. So that means, as some people said, other other countries can say, well, if North Korea can do it, I mean, why not Saudi Arabia? Why not Iran? Iran is really watching closely what's happening now. So that means that the United States is a little bit stuck, like they cannot accept everything at the same time, saying, okay, North Korea nuclear.
Ali Heinonen, countries like Iran who've signed a nuclear deal, but also you could even argue countries like Ukraine who've scaled back their capabilities. Are they feeling like perhaps they did the wrong thing when they see what's going on with North Korea?
Well, I think it's hard to say, but you know, I disagree with the previous speaker. If you let this one now to proceed and you start the negotiation without freezing somehow the nuclear program, you are going to lose that game. Because the history shows that they were developing all the time their nuclear weapon capability. During the agreed framework, they made the plutonium metallurgy outside of the IAEA domain. Otherwise, they would have never been able to do the test in 2006. So I think it's a historical error if we just let the nuclear program proceed as it is when the negotiation starts. It's difficult, I agree, but it should be done.
That's
all right.
Difficult.
After saying that all options were on the table, we're going to listen to Donald Trump now. The U.S. president was asked over the weekend what he would do next.
Mr. President, will you attack North Korea?
We'll see. Tristan Webb, is he bluffing?
We have to hope so, because if the USA attacks North Korea, especially if North Korea now has a hydrogen bomb in its arsenal, we're looking at the deaths of potentially millions of civilians, perhaps not just in the region, but perhaps also on the US mainland as well. There is a clear line of thought that actually Trump may be playing a clever game here, playing what's known in the international policy circles as the Madman strategy, developed by Henry Kissinger and Nixon during the time of the Vietnam War. Now, Henry Kissinger has been advising Donald Trump behind the scenes, it seems. And Trump seems to really be giving this impression, particularly to China, as part of his attempts to get China to do more, that maybe, just maybe, he is willing to unleash the dogs of war and let havoc wreak. I don't think that he will be doing that. And if we look at some of the more cautious members of his cabinet and some of his other appointees, they've been careful to row that back. So, for example, James Mattis has said that although they have many options to annihilate North Korea as a country, they're not looking at that now. And Ambassador Haley at the UN Security Council just now has said that although Kim Jong-un is, quote, begging for war, the USA does not want to engage in war now. So on balance, I think that it looks like Donald Trump will not issue an order for an attack against North Korea, but perhaps deliberately, he's very difficult to read on this as to just what he will be doing.
So how does to answer Dorian Malovich's question from earlier, Tristan, what does the Security Council do to sort of change the familiar tale of the merry-go-round of condemnation and more tests?
It's really difficult for the Security Council. Russia and China have emphasized that what they would like to see more of is not just the sanctions, which previous UN Security Council resolutions have called for, but also a return to the six-party talks, which those resolutions have mentioned in the same document. They've said we need sanctions, we also need dialogue. So that's what China and Russia want. But when the US say that they want to exhaust all diplomatic options, for the Security Council, that also includes revisiting the status of North Korea's membership of the UN. After all, it has flagrantly disobeyed UN Security Council resolutions for more than 10 years now. That's a violation of the UN Charter. Therefore, there is a case to be made that North Korea's membership of the UN could be called into question.
All right, we'll pick up on that point when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.
find the team here at France 24 humble, hardworking, and with their feet on the ground.
Et c'est une des seules chaînes d'infos où on nous laisse jouer en plateau avec des Legos, avec des robots, avec tout un tas d'objets.
We take a return ticket to revisit some of the key people and places of the last 50 years of world television news.
على فرانس 24 يمكننا أن نحاور أصحاب القرار من العالم في كل الميادين ولدينا المساحة لكشف ثنايا مسيرتهم.
Les femmes, elles sont souvent victimes de l'actualité internationale, mais ce sont aussi des actrices majeures de la géopolitique. Et d'ailleurs, on en parle dans France 24.
What do you want from your news website? France24.com, giving you easier access to information and faster for a unique experience. France24.com, the international news website.
Welcome back. Before we resume the France 24 debate, some of the stories we're following for you in the newsroom. Colombia's government and its last rebel movement agreed to a ceasefire deal, the agreement with the ELN to go into effect October the 1st. After France's president, Germany's chancellor calls for the lifting of the travel ban on Venezuelan activist Lilian Tintori, who was barred from joining a European tour of opposition representatives. Kenya's Electoral Commission sets October 17th as the date for a redo of that country's presidential election, an electoral commission that the outgoing government is keeping, despite last Friday's cancellation of the results from last month. And UN investigators call for crimes against humanity charges at the highest level in Burundi. Charges of executions and tortures dismissed by the government as part of, quote, a Western plot to enslave African states. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate after the apparent explosion of a hydrogen bomb by North Korea that triggered a 6.3 magnitude quake. We're discussing what options are now on the table, as it seems to be a new step for North Korea. With us to talk about it, he's the former Deputy Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Ali Heinonen, advisor at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Welcome back from Washington. Welcome back to Dorian Malevich, Asia editor for French daily newspaper La Croix, and was the co-author of North Korea in 100 Questions. Tristan Webb, senior analyst at Korea Risk Group, and from New York City, Suki Kim, investigative journalist and the author of Without You, There Is No Us, Undercover Among the Sons of North Korea's Elites. Before I ask you about your book, let's just talk about the apprehension which was palpable this Monday in the South Korean capital, with public opinion, as you're about to hear, divided over what to do next.
If we respond to North Korea in the same way as they do, we will all drive ourselves toward destruction. So I think we need to maintain calm and continue to try having dialogue with the North, while closely cooperating with our allies, including the US and Japan.
I think North Korea's actions are very bad. We in the international community have continuously said we would help out the North, but the country acted in its own way. We should strengthen our national defense and strongly respond to North Korea's provocative acts.
Suki, let me ask you, Moon Jae-in elected recently as the new president, and more moderate than his nationalist predecessor. Where's public opinion going as far as what to do next? We've seen this Monday talk of more closer cooperation with the United States when it comes to taking on the North. What are the options for Seoul?
The interesting thing is the panic that we're seeing in the outside isn't as felt in South Korea. They've been dealing with this problem for about 70 years. So, and Moon Jae-in's pro-engagement towards North Korea is also not that new. You know, there was another former president, basically followed a same path, and that didn't do anything except bringing about nuclear North Korea. So it's just enabling North Korea, which threat comes every few months, and then the international community appease that, and then it goes on, and it's low for a while, and then it's high for a while. So in reality, South Koreans generally feel just deal with them, pacify them, and then maintain the status quo, which is a very depressing idea, but also because there's really no other option, because war is not an option. It's a nuclear power surrounded by China, Russia, Japan, South Korea. Nuclear war tension obviously is not the way forward.
All right, that's the mindset south of the 38th parallel. What about in the north? In your book, you explain how you went as a language teacher in 2015 to and got an insight into what the thinking was in the high halls of power there.
Well, I visited North Korea for about a decade, starting 2002. And I lived for 6 months undercover in 2011, living with the future leadership, 20-year-old young men in a locked compound, 270 of them. I was really after the psychology of how the upper class, the powers of North Korea really think. And, what I found was really a state that I, having pursued it and visited it for a decade, had never foreseen the depth of control. Before that, I'd also interviewed about over 100 defectors outside of North Korea, but nothing prepared me for the absoluteness of control and abuse that's within the system. So when you look at North Korea that way, the people inside have to change for this standstill to go anywhere. And for that standstill to go change, then we have to from the outside, instill that change inside. That's about the only option, because really, it's only going to get worse and worse. North Korea is not going to give up nuclear weapons. That's never going to happen. The only possibility that this could change would be a regime change, because the great leader system is so fundamental that is not going to moderate or lessen.
So you're saying it's just as reclusive as it was when you first went. But let me ask you, because we've been reading these stories about the relative opening up of the North Korean economy, more and more trade, even the beginnings of a sort of an in-house internet system. Could change not come from within?
To be honest, I was hearing them, even back in 2011 when I went in to live there. What I found was a system that was more reclusive than I ever imagined when I started researching seriously from 2002. This is a decade of watching North Korea. Also, I'm South Korean and fluent in the language. So it's a subject that is not at all foreign to me. I come from a family that's been separated by the Korean War. What I found inside, once you really go in the depth of North Korea, was that control so tight and so abusive. Outside, even then, people thought people were kind of using the internet, at least among the elite. My students were computer majors. They all told me they knew what the internet was. Living with them, you realize so much what it was propaganda. They had no idea. They were computer majors. Creme de la creme of North Korea had no idea what the internet was. The amount of lie that is being told to the outside world to keep up a facade of an openness was actually astounding. And I think that I had personally also didn't think it was as bad as what I found inside. So having seen that and experienced it, and that only happened because I was living with them embedded. I wasn't interviewing them. I was just living day to day with them, very intimately, sharing 3 meals a day with them, that I thought, how is this possibly going to change? There is no agency. There is no mode of power to group, to rise above, to do anything. Maybe the border area, which is far more fluid with the Chinese traffic. But when you go in the depth of North Korea, you realize why North Korea has been able to maintain this absurd, cruel, violating system of the great leader is because, which is basically a cult ideology. That's not a presidency. It's because it is so controlled. You know, the amount, it's unheard of. Your citizens are not allowed to leave or anybody allowed to come in. I mean, this kind of system where you can hide the internet from 20-year-old young elite is, and you know, beyond the idea of feminine glove, the actual system of control is just tight, airtight.
Dorian Malovic.
That's very interesting what you are talking about. I've not been to North Korea. I've been to the border in the 1990s, you know, in Manchuria, in Yanbian, Yanji, Tumen, and Dandong, all along the border, interviewing defectors coming out. I think the system, I mean, is more open than before for trade, for buying things from China, from all over the world, coming to China, and then they sell. They can buy, they can sell, and you have everything coming in. But that doesn't mean that the North Korean people are eager to look for more freedom. They are not so eager to find more democracy or whatever. I mean, from what I know is that the term democracy, dissidents, or criticizing the regime is not in their mind, in their set of mind. You know, they might be interested in watching TV series, soap operas from South Korea, from Japan, to have the new Japanese thing on the video and everything. But maybe, you know, we are a little bit, we tend to project our own ideas and say, well, they are just starving for freedom, for democracy. But I think it's going to take a long time. I mean, and as she's saying, I mean, it's not just like you open TV and the people are going to change their set of mind, you know, I think.
All right, we heard the South Korean president talk about perhaps more oil sanctions. This reaction on the hashtag F24 debate, North Korea cannot survive one winter without China's oil. Isn't there a simpler solution to this world crisis? No one seriously dares China. Ali Heinonen, your thoughts on closing the tap when it comes to oil trade with North Korea?
Well, this is certainly one way to control it. But I would like actually to say a couple of words to the previous speaker as well. After the first nuclear test, we met high-level North Korean officials when we visited from the IAEA. And the highest person we met was President Jong-un. And I think that they are looking also to the future somewhat differently than what we have here. And I think that I'm a bit more positive than just people who interview some people who escaped the country. They have a plan also to survive. And I think that this is where we should count to the elite, those who are around the current leader, that if they see another way ahead for their country.
Tristan Webb, we've been talking about the mind frame in Pyongyang. How do you negotiate with them? What's your thoughts on what kind of a negotiation you can have?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I think we need to recognize that the strategic line for the pursuit of nuclear weapons is not some personal policy of Kim Jong-un. Absolutely, his claim for legitimacy benefits from it. But it's the position of the Korean Workers' Party as a whole and has been for several decades. So when we're negotiating, we should recognize that it's not just the personal policy of Kim Jong-un, but a much more established line. But for negotiations, it's going to be very difficult for all sides to be happy, because the US, South Korea and Japan want denuclearization, but as we've heard, there seems to be agreement that North Korea just isn't going to accept that. What China would like is to return to the six-party talks where progress is made in several areas simultaneously. So on the nuclear side, you can say that denuclearization remains the final goal, but we're going to start making progress, confidence-building measures before that. At the same time, we're also going to have talks on economic measures, softening sanctions, gradually expanding investment, and at the same time also political measures, such as talking about a peace treaty, what the terms of that treaty would be, what sort of new security architecture could be had for the region. So that's what China and Russia really want from negotiations.
That's what they want from negotiations. But Tristan, let me ask you, because here you have this test that takes place just as Beijing is hosting this BRICS summit. The U.S. ambassador to Beijing quoted as saying that the Chinese leader has nothing but disparaging words in private. for the leader of North Korea, but the Chinese seem a little helpless.
Yes, they do seem helpless, and this is likely to be a key source of frustration for the US as it seeks to implement its policy of maximum pressure and engagement against North Korea, wanting China to do most of the heavy lifting on that. There are several problems with that approach. One is whether or not North Korea would respond positively in response to massive pressure from China, such as cutting off oil. There are those who say that actually that would make North Korea more reclusive and cling more firmly to its nuclear weapons. But other problems include whether or not China would be willing to encourage such instability right on its doorstep. That would be very bad for China. And we also need to put in perspective that although China is very critical of North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons, it has actually often been more critical of the US for its military maneuvers in the region and for its broader policy towards North Korea as a whole.
Do you see a situation, Olli Heinonen, where perhaps we could have a toning down of these military maneuvers from the U.S. as a prelude to negotiations? It's obviously not where we're at right now.
I think it's hard to see because we need to understand also what's happening in the North Korea and how they see, on one hand, their nuclear weapon development. And to that end, I think that I would a little bit caution people. Let's wait the facts from this previous test and let the intelligence people to find out what kind of stumbling blocks North Korea may still have. Because this might tell us how much we have time to negotiate and which kind of negotiations we have. Then the other vector or clock we should look is the impact of sanctions. Sure, they will have impact on North Korea, what's happening now from the latest UN sanctions. And in particular, if they are going to control more the oil flow to the country, which is entirely dependent practically from imports of energy, and then the remaining things like textile exports. So there are several factors which will have an impact on this willingness of North Korea to go for these negotiations.
Well, Soo-Ki Kim, your thoughts on what China should do and what the U.S. should do?
You know, this is the problem. I mean, obviously, it's no one's been able to solve this, and it's a bit of an unworkable problem for a number of reasons. Because agreements don't work, because it's a system built on lies. Everything about North Korea is a lie. So you can make agreements which they will inevitably break. So that means agreements don't work. Sanctions have never proven to work. And nuclear war is an option, that's not a possible option. Another fact about this problem is that Kim Jong-un himself is more reckless than the leaders previous. It's not that different with America now, with Trump as the president. So with this problem, I think that we do have to accept North Korea is a nuclear power that will not give it up. Then with that equation, the only possibility is to instill a slow regime change, and that can only be brought about, as hopeless as it is, with engagement efforts being thrown in there. So people there are finally empowered, even though most of it is not going to go to people, that somehow this 70 years of basically citizens having zero power to rise up against this most cruel regime in the world, somehow people in there have to change. And the only way that can even remotely be possible is, so what I'm trying to say is engagement efforts. And what I mean is the humanitarian efforts, I think, is in this case the only option forward, because it's not going to change. North Korean great leader system will not change unless that system doesn't exist anymore.
Which brings us to Donald Trump's tweets this weekend. He not only had harsh words for North Korea, but also for South Korea. Still on Saturday, he had the possibility of pulling out of a 2012 free trade deal with Seoul. Trump, who had this to tweet, South Korea is finding, as I have told them, that their talk of appeasement with North Korea will not work. They only understand one thing. He went further in his Sunday tweets, saying the United States is considering to other options, stopping all trade with any country doing business with North Korea. That has Dorian Malovic shaking his head.
Well, I'm not the only one to react that way. I mean, a lot of people, they don't understand what that means. I mean, actually, you want to stop business with people doing business with North Korea, so you start with China. And that means that the trade with between China and the States is more than $800 billion every year, and then you have to stop making bank exchanges.
So it's an empty threat.
It's an empty threat. So that means it's not credibility again. Again, on an ally, considered an ally of South Korea, I mean, pressuring South Korea like this. And then now you have Moon Jae-in saying, we have to vote for more sanctions on North Korea, which was not what he said yesterday under the pressure of Trump. That means even among the states and the so-called allies, there is no unity. And then what I wanted to say is that if we want to do something to be done, we need to put Xi Jinping, the Chinese, and Donald Trump, the American, a little bit more closer together, trying to find something more consensual with North Korea, providing economic help, security, so they can talk. They can start to talk with North Korea. I mean, they should try something new, but the relationship now with China is not good. With Russia, it's not good, and even now with South Korea. No, South Korea has never been, master of its own destiny, and it's not going to be like this now, because the Americans, they are the masters in South Korea. I'm sorry to say.
The Americans are the masters. Ali Heinonen, your thoughts on the volatility, the differences between the tweets from Donald Trump and the statements from other agencies of the U.S. federal government. Does that add to the danger?
Yes, it is. And we all note that all these statements are a little bit at variance. There are people who are promoting negotiations, but perhaps with backup of all other options. And I think this is one of the most important decisions the U.S. government has to do now in next 1 week, when they have analyzed all the data which they get from this nuclear weapons test and put it together, that what is the best way to proceed. And then I would also say a little bit about the sanctions. I feel sympathy for President to one extent. If you look the UN Security Council Sanctions Panel report, only half of the member states reported how they have implemented the sanctions. And among those were countries which actually supported the UN Security Council resolutions when they were in the Council. So there is a little bit work still to be done also on the sanction side.
All right. One final word, Tristan Webb. How much attention do you pay to what Donald Trump says?
A great deal. And I'd like to pick up from those comments we've just heard. Although North Korea is the great pressing subject of concern for us, we also need to pay great attention to the relationships of the countries surrounding North Korea, which ultimately may be the more significant part of this story. We have seen already that Russia and China are becoming much closer in their diplomatic coordination in response to North Korea. With Trump, he has not only threatened to tear up the free trade agreement with South Korea, but he has said that in last year in his campaign that the US can no longer be the world's policeman. And we see Japan revisiting its pacifist constitution as well, and that's in relation to North Korea as well. So these 5 countries are all renegotiating their relationship with each other subtly, and North Korea is the accelerator for that. And Kim Jong-un, at the test of the ICBM last month, welcomed this final stage of the showdown with the US because it put the North Koreans at the center of a new geopolitical order for the world that was emerging. And when we look at things like China and Russia's furious response to US talk of increased unilateral sanctions against them, we can really see the potential for a potentially very grave worsening of relations between the 5 powers surrounding North Korea. And Trump's a big part of that, obviously.
All right, and we're going to leave it there. Tristan Webb, I want to thank you for joining us from London. I want to thank Soo-Ki Kim for being with us from New York City. Ali Heinonen in Washington. Dorian Malovic. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. Let me say hello to Olivia Salazar-Winspear.
Hi there.
So the coverage, we've been talking about it on the western side of things.
Well, certainly, I think we can say that as far as North Korea goes, politically, militarily, there's nothing good to report here. There's no positive spin we can put on this, except the news was announced with a great smile today on North Korean state television from one TV presenter, and her name is Ri Chi-hun. Now, you might recognise this lady in her pink hanbok smiling there, but who is she? The UK Telegraph has given us a few clues about this enigmatic figure. She's been reading the news on North Korea's state television since 1971, and at 73 years old, she was actually meant to go into retirement in 2012. We all recognise her, of course. She does come back for exceptional occasions, and this was one of them. She also announced the test of the intercontinental ballistic missile in July, and it said the reason that she's so popular, that she does come back to the airwaves, is that she has a very powerful voice. She's very emotional. In fact, she was in tears on screen, visibly, when she announced the death of Kim Il-sung in 1994, and was holding back her, tears when she announced the death of his son, Kim Jong-il, in 2011. Now, as for the current leader of North Korea, who is alive and well, as far as we believe. There's been plenty of musing on the internet, of course, this afternoon in terms of editorials. Just what is his strategy? Is he calling Donald Trump's bluff here, or has he got another agenda? Now, this article came out this afternoon. It was interesting, coming at it from another perspective, what North Korea wants. The first point the author really makes quite strongly is we have to remember we're dealing with somebody who's not seeking a mandate from his people. Kim Jong-un believes he'll be ruling for the rest of his life, for another 40 years perhaps. And so his priorities are perhaps, the rules of the game are slightly different. He has to consolidate power and show strength, force for his own people, because the idea is that his posturing is not for the outside world, according to this author. It's for domestic consumption, and to stop belief in the regime crumbling, as it were. The same website takes a lighter look at the current nuclear missile tests, saying that they're causing maximum irritation with the timing of these tests, because they always seem to fall on a US bank holiday, of course the long Labour Day weekend now, which means of course lots of journalists were rushing back into work to cover it. Now, as far as the French press go, they were covering this with pictures, not words, poking fun at Kim Jong-un, of course. There's a very infantile pose with an H-shaped balloon, and this cartoon where he's standing on top of H for the Hwasong 14 missile, saying, "Are you still looking down on me now?" You see he's slightly taller than Trump in that photo. The hair has a lot to play there. Now,
Trump's got hair too, by the way.
Indeed. Yeah. Going to a bit more of a serious angle on this story, that missile itself that everyone is talking about and has got everyone worried, is a little bit abstract in terms of the technology, what we've been talking about so far. So this article from Le Monde actually decrypts what we're talking about here in terms of the length, the capacity, and it has a very interesting interactive element saying how things have evolved over the last 30 years or so. So in 1985, you see, there was a 300-kilometre capacity with the Hwasong 5, going to the end of July now with this Hwasong 14, 10,000-kilometre capacity, and the infographic at the end there shows you just how far that can go on the globe. So if, for example, I click on the latest one, you'll see it reaches Western Europe, it reaches much of the Middle East, it reaches the western seaboard of the United States. So it really does show you just how far that goes. The article also points out that this has helped scientists, this recent test has helped scientists discover where the Koreans are in terms of the development of this missile. And in fact, they're not 4 years away from developing a missile that will hit American soil. It could be as soon as 12 months.
Okay, many thanks for that. Olivia Salazar-Winspear. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.